I've spent 3 years rehearsing this confession in my head. 3 years of sleepless nights, of watching relationships crumble from a distance, of knowing that I was the architect of destruction that no one ever suspected. I've smiled at people who would hate me if they knew the truth. I've accepted kindness from a woman I systematically destroyed. And I've lived with a guilt so heavy that some days, breathing feels like punishment. My name is Elise, and I need to tell you what I did. Not because I deserve absolution, I don't. Not because I think it will make anything better. It won't. I'm telling you because the weight of this secret has become unbearable. And because somewhere out there, the people I hurt deserve to know the truth, even if they never hear it directly from me. This is the story of how I lied to my girlfriend and betrayed her best friend forever, and how justice, when it finally came, arrived in ways I never could have predicted. Let me start at the beginning, because you need to understand who I was before you can understand what I became capable of. I grew up in a small town in Surrey, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and your business is never really your own. My parents were comfortable, not wealthy, but comfortable. My father worked in insurance. My mother was a teaching assistant. They love me in the way parents do when they don't quite understand their child. Consistently, if somewhat distantly. I was ambitious from a young age, not in the healthy way that drives people to work hard and earn their success, but in the desperate, clawing way that comes from never feeling like enough. I watched the popular girls in school with their easy confidence and their effortless friendships, and I wanted what they had so badly it became an ache in my chest. But I was awkward, too intense, too obviously hungry for acceptance. And people can smell desperation. They stay away from it like it's contagious. I learned to hide the desperation. I learned to perform confidence, to study what made people likable and mimic it until the mimicry became second nature. By the time I reached university, I had perfected the art of being exactly what people wanted me to be. Agreeable when agreement was needed, assertive when assertion was expected, a chameleon, always adapting, never quite real. It worked. I made friends, built a social circle, graduated with a degree in communications, and landed a job at a PR firm in London. On paper, I was a success. Inside, I was still that awkward girl from Surrey, convinced that if anyone saw the real me, they would run. I met Natalie Price when I was 25 years old. She was a junior designer at an advertising agency that shared our building. I noticed her in the elevator one morning, dark curly hair, warm brown eyes, a laugh that seemed to come from somewhere deep and genuine. She was talking to a colleague about something mundane, a coffee order that had been wrong, but she made it sound like the most entertaining story in the world. I was captivated, not just by her beauty, though she was beautiful, but by her ease, her authenticity, the way she seemed to move through the world without the constant calculation that governed my every interaction. She was everything I had always wanted to be and knew I never could. I engineered our meeting. That's what I did. I engineered things. I found out her name from the building directory, discovered through social media that she was an avid runner, and I started showing up at the same park where she did her morning jogs. It took 3 chance encounters before she recognized me, and another 2 before she suggested we grab coffee sometime. I should feel guilty about the manipulation even then. But I didn't. I told myself that everyone plays games in the early stages of dating, that I was just being proactive about what I wanted. And what I wanted was Natalie. We dated for 6 months before she told me she loved me. I said it back, and in the moment, I believed it. But looking back, I'm not sure I was capable of love. Not real love. The kind that puts someone else's needs before your own. What I felt for Natalie was more like possession. She was bright and beautiful and made me feel, for the first time in my life, like I might actually be worth something. I couldn't lose that. I wouldn't. And then I met Camille. Camille Foster was Natalie's best friend from childhood. They'd grown up on the same street in Brighton, gone to the same schools, stay close through university and careers that took them in different directions. Natalie talked about Camille constantly, inside jokes, shared memories, a history so deep and intertwined that sometimes I felt like an outsider in my own relationship. Camille was working in Paris when Natalie and I first started dating, but she moved back to London about 8 months into our relationship. A job opportunity, Natalie explained. Something too good to pass up. She was thrilled. Her best friend, finally in the same city after years of long-distance friendship. I was not thrilled. I was terrified. Because I recognized in Camille something that immediately made me defensive. She was everything I pretended to be, but genuine. She was confident without arrogance, warm without agenda, the kind of person who made everyone around her feel comfortable and seen. She was also gorgeous, willowy and blonde with features that belonged on magazine covers, and completely unaware of her own appeal, which somehow made it worse. But more than any of that, Camille knew Natalie in ways I never would. She had 20 years of history, 20 years of inside jokes and shared experiences and understanding that went beyond words. When they were together, they had a shorthand I couldn't access, references I didn't understand, a bond that made me feel like a guest in my own relationship. I tried to like Camille, I really did. I attended dinners and weekend brunches and wine nights where she and Natalie would reminisce about their childhood adventures while I smiled and nodded and pretended I didn't feel invisible. I told myself the jealousy was temporary, that once Camille settled into London life and developed her own social circle, things would balance out. But they didn't balance out. If anything, Camille became more central to Natalie's life. They started a weekly yoga class together. They texted constantly. Camille was the first person Natalie called when she had good news or bad news or any news at all. And I found myself increasingly on the periphery, watching a friendship that felt like a threat to everything I built. The moment I decided to destroy that friendship, because that's what I did, I decided consciously and deliberately, came on an ordinary Wednesday evening. Natalie and I were having dinner at our flat. We'd moved in together a few months earlier, a step that should have made me feel secure but somehow didn't. She was telling me about her day, something about a client meeting and a design that wasn't working, and then her phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it, smiled, and typed a quick response. I asked who it was. Just Camille, she said. She's having a crisis about this guy she's been seeing. Wants to grab drinks tomorrow to talk it through. You saw her yesterday, I pointed out. Natalie looked up, confused. So? I'm just saying, you spend a lot of time with her. She's my best friend, Elise. We've been over this. We had been over it. Multiple times, and every time I came out looking like the insecure, jealous girlfriend I desperately didn't want to be. So I dropped it, smiled, changed the subject, but inside, something hardened. I was tired of being second place. Tired of sharing Natalie with someone who had a claim on her that predated mine and would probably outlast it. Tired of feeling like no matter how much I gave to this relationship, Camille would always matter more. If I couldn't compete with their history, I decided I would destroy it. The plan came together slowly, over weeks of observation and careful thought. I didn't want to do anything obvious, nothing that could be traced back to me, nothing that would make me look like the villain. I needed to find a way to create a rift between Natalie and Camille that seemed organic, that would look like their own fault rather than my engineering. Camille's dating life provided the opportunity. She had started seeing someone new around that time, a man named David, whom she'd met through a mutual friend. David worked in finance, was handsome in a bland sort of way, and seemed completely smitten with Camille. They'd been on maybe half a dozen dates when I started paying attention. David was the perfect target because he didn't really matter to anyone. He wasn't Camille's soulmate. He was a placeholder, someone to have dinner with while she figured out what she really wanted. And he was clearly insecure about his relationship with her. constantly seeking reassurance, always worried that someone better might come along. People like David are easy to manipulate. I know because I used to be one of them. The first step was subtle. I started paying David extra attention at group gatherings. Not flirtatious, nothing obvious, just the kind of warm, engaged interest that makes someone feel special. I asked about his job, his hobbies, his opinions on things. I remembered details he mentioned and brought them up later. I made him feel seen. It worked. Within a few weeks, David was seeking me out at parties, wanting to continue our conversations, grateful for attention from someone other than Camille. And I let him believe, through carefully calibrated hints and suggestions, that Camille wasn't as invested in their relationship as he was. She seems distracted lately, I'd say, with just the right note of concern. Have you noticed? I'm sure it's nothing. Or, Camille mentioned she's been working late a lot. Some colleague named James. I think they're on a project together. There was no James, but David didn't know that. I watched the insecurity take root. I watched him start to question Camille's commitment, to interpret her busy schedule and occasional distraction as signs of something sinister. And when the doubts became unbearable, when he finally confronted Camille about her supposed interest in someone else, I was there to witness the fallout. Camille was blindsided. She had no idea where David's accusations were coming from, no idea that I had been systematically poisoning his perception of their relationship. She tried to explain, to reassure him, but the damage was done. David didn't believe her. The trust was broken. They broke up shortly after, and Camille was devastated. Not because she'd lost David specifically, and as I'd suspected, he was never more than a placeholder, but because she couldn't understand what had gone wrong. She replayed their conversations endlessly, looking for the moment things had soured, never finding it because it wasn't there. I comforted her, of course. I was the supportive girlfriend of her best friend, the sympathetic ear, the shoulder to cry on. I told her David was clearly insecure and that she deserved better. I told her she'd done nothing wrong. The lie was so smooth, so comfortable, I barely felt it. But destroying Camille's relationship was just the first phase. The real target was her friendship with Natalie. That would require something more direct, more devastating, more impossible to recover from. I found my opportunity about 2 months later, during a week when Natalie was traveling for work. A conference in Manchester, 4 days of meetings and networking events. We'd talked about me coming along, but I'd begged off, claiming my own work commitments. In truth, I needed her away. I needed space to execute the next phase of my plan. Camille and I had become closer during the David saga. She trusted me now, confided in me, considered me a friend in my own right rather than just Natalie's girlfriend. She had no idea that everything she told me was being cataloged, analyzed, stored for future use. On the second night of Natalie's trip, I invited Camille over for dinner. Just the two of us, I said, a chance to catch up properly without the distraction of group gatherings. She accepted immediately, touched by the gesture. The evening started normally enough. We drank wine, ate pasta, talked about work and dating, and the general chaos of our late 20s. Camille was relaxed, open, grateful for the company. And I was patient, biding my time, waiting for the right moment. It came after the second bottle of wine when Camille started talking about Natalie. I worry about her sometimes, Camille said, swirling her glass. She works so hard, I feel like she never really relaxes anymore. She's ambitious, I agreed, sometimes too ambitious. And she bottles things up, you know? She seems fine on the surface, but underneath there's all this stuff she never talks about. I nodded sympathetically, encouraging her to continue. I just hope you can be patient with her, Camille said. She's not always good at opening up. It takes time to really know her. And there it was. The opening I'd been waiting for. Actually, I said, letting my voice waver just slightly, there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about Natalie. But I don't know if I should. Camille leaned forward, concerned. What is it? I hesitated, performed hesitation really, the careful pause of someone wrestling with a difficult truth. I don't want to put you in an awkward position. You're her best friend. Elise, whatever it is, you can tell me. I want to help. I took a deep breath. I think Natalie might be cheating on me. The words landed exactly as I'd intended. Camille's face went through shock, disbelief, protective anger on Natalie's behalf, and then, crucially, uncertainty. Because I was her friend now too, and I'd said these words with such apparent reluctance, such obvious pain. What? No, Elise, that can't be right. Natalie would never. I know how it sounds. But there have been things. Late nights at work that don't quite add up. Texts she hides from me, a name that keeps coming up in conversations. What name? I paused as if reluctant to say it. James. The fictional James again. The same phantom I'd used to destroy her relationship with David. Camille wouldn't make the connection. Why would she? She didn't know I was the source of David's paranoia. She mentions him sometimes, I continued, just casually, like he's just a colleague, but then she gets these texts and she smiles in this way. I don't know, maybe I'm being paranoid. Have you talked to her about it? I'm afraid to. What if I'm wrong? I don't want to accuse her of something she hasn't done. But what if I'm right? What if she's been lying to me this whole time? I let my voice break. I let tears gather in my eyes. I was good at this. Years of practice, years of performing emotions I didn't quite feel. And Camille, kind-hearted Camille who just wanted to help, believed every word. Okay, she said, taking my hand. Okay, let me talk to her. Carefully. I won't mention you specifically, but I can ask some questions, try to figure out what's going on. That was exactly what I'd wanted. I needed Camille to approach Natalie with suspicion, to ask questions that would seem to come from nowhere, to plant seeds of doubt from the inside. When Natalie reacted with confusion, when she denied any affair with a man who didn't exist, Camille's suspicions would deepen. Why would Elise make something like that up? There must be something Natalie was hiding. The trap was set. What happened over the next few weeks unfolded like a slow-motion car crash, and I watched every excruciating moment. Camille, true to her word, began subtly questioning Natalie. Are you happy with Elise? Is everything okay at work? How's your colleague James doing? Natalie, who had no colleague named James, responded with confusion. She didn't know what Camille was talking about. There was no James. Where was this coming from? But instead of accepting Natalie's denials, Camille's suspicion grew. Why would Elise lie? Elise had seemed genuinely distressed, genuinely worried. If Natalie was innocent, why couldn't she just explain? The conversations escalated. What started as gentle probing became pointed questioning, which became outright accusations. Camille told Natalie that she knew something was going on, that Elise had confided in her, that the least Natalie could do was be honest with her best friend. Natalie was blindsided, furious, hurt beyond words. She had no idea what Camille was talking about, no idea where these accusations were coming from. All she knew was that her best friend seemed convinced she was a cheater, and nothing she said could change that conviction. The fight that finally erupted between them was legendary. Years of friendship, shattered in a single evening of screaming and tears and accusations that cut to the bone. Camille called Natalie a liar. Natalie called Camille paranoid and controlling. Words were said that couldn't be taken back. Lines were crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. And I sat at home following the chaos through texts and calls. playing the concerned girlfriend who just wanted everyone to calm down. When Natalie came home that night, devastated and confused, I held her while she cried and assured her that Camille would come around, that friendships could survive fights, that everything would be okay. But it wasn't okay. It was never going to be okay because I had designed it that way. Natalie and Camille stopped speaking. Completely. The friendship that had spanned 20 years, that had survived distance and change and every challenge life could throw at it, ended with a silence so absolute it was like a death. Natalie grieved. She grieved hard, in the way you grieve for someone who's still alive but no longer in your life. She didn't understand what had happened, couldn't make sense of Camille's sudden turn against her. She asked me repeatedly if I had any idea what had set Camille off. I lied, of course. I told her I'd noticed Camille seeming stressed lately, that maybe the pressure of work and the dating disaster had affected her more than anyone realized. I suggested that Camille had projected her own insecurities onto their friendship. That sometimes people lashed out at the ones they love most. Natalie believed me. Why wouldn't she? I was her girlfriend, her partner, the person she trusted most now that Camille was gone. And every lie I told solidified my position, moved me from second place to first, gave me exactly what I'd wanted. I had won. Except winning felt nothing like I'd expected. The first few months after the friendship ended were, in some twisted way, the happiest of my life. Natalie was fully mine now. No more competing for attention, no more feeling like an outsider in my own relationship. When something happened in her life, I was the first person she called. When she needed support, she turned to me. I was everything to her, but slowly, insidiously, the consequences of what I'd done began to make themselves known. Natalie changed. Without Camille, without that anchor to her past and her identity, she became someone different. Someone smaller, less certain, less alive. The confidence that had first attracted me to her began to dim. She second-guessed herself constantly, wondered aloud what was wrong with her that her best friend would turn on her so completely. She became anxious, clingy, afraid of abandonment in a way she'd never been before. I had gotten what I wanted, and what I wanted was destroying her. And then there was the guilt. I hadn't anticipated the guilt. In my calculations, in my careful planning, I had somehow failed to account for the fact that I would have to live with what I'd done. Every time Natalie mentioned Camille, and she mentioned her often despite the estrangement, I felt it. Every time she cried about the friendship she'd lost, I felt it. Every time she looked at me with gratitude for being her rock through this difficult time, I felt it so intensely I thought I might choke. But I couldn't confess. Confession would mean losing everything I'd worked for. Natalie, my carefully constructed life. The identity I'd built around being her partner. So I buried the guilt, pushed it down, told myself it would fade with time. It didn't fade. It grew. It metastasized. And it started to leak out in ways I couldn't control. I became paranoid. Every conversation Natalie had with anyone felt like a threat. What if she reconnected with Camille? What if someone revealed what I'd done? What if the whole elaborate structure of lies came crashing down? I started checking her phone when she wasn't looking, monitoring her social media, asking too many questions about her day. The same controlling behavior I'd accused Camille of encouraging, I was now exhibiting myself. Natalie noticed, of course she did. And the fight started, not about Camille, but about trust, about space, about my increasing inability to let her breathe. I don't understand what's happening to us, she said one night after a particularly ugly argument. You used to be so confident, so secure. Now it's like you don't trust me at all. I trust you, I said. I'm just stressed. Work has been difficult. It's not just work. You've been different ever since Camille left. She was right. The irony was almost unbearable. I had destroyed her friendship to secure my place in her life, and the destruction was now destroying us. I should have confessed then. I should have told her everything, accepted the consequences. Let the truth set us both free. But I was a coward. I had always been a coward, so I doubled down on the lies, promised to work on my anxiety, suggested we see a couples therapist, anything to avoid the reckoning I knew was coming. 18 months after Camille and Natalie stopped speaking, the truth began to surface in ways I never expected. It started with David. David, the placeholder boyfriend I'd manipulated into destroying his relationship with Camille. David, who I'd assumed would fade into irrelevance once he served his purpose. David, who had apparently spent the last year and a half piecing together what had really happened. He reached out to Camille first. An email apologizing for how things had ended, explaining that he'd been wrong to accuse her. He'd done some therapy, he said, worked through his insecurity issues. And in the process, he'd started to question where his paranoia about James had really come from. Camille, still wounded but curious, agreed to meet him for coffee. That conversation led to others. David couldn't remember exactly what I'd said to him, but he remembered the pattern, the subtle insinuations, the concerned but suggestive questions, the way I'd always seemed to be there when his doubts were strongest. He didn't have proof of anything specific, but he had a feeling that he'd been manipulated and that I was the one who'd done it. Camille didn't believe him at first. Why would Elise sabotage their relationship? What could she possibly gain from it? But the seed was planted and Camille was nothing if not thorough. She started going through old messages, reconstructing timelines, looking for inconsistencies in the story I'd told her about Natalie's supposed affair. And she found them. The conversations where I'd been too sympathetic, too conveniently available, too eager to steer her toward conclusions she hadn't reached herself. The moments where my concern had felt performative, now that she was looking with fresh eyes. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to make her wonder. She reached out to Natalie, a text message after 18 months of silence. Can we talk? I think I may have made a terrible mistake. Natalie showed me the message. She was shaking, torn between hope and fear, desperate to believe that her oldest friendship might not be dead after all. I felt the walls closing in. What do you think I should do? She asked. Every instinct screamed at me to discourage her, to point out how much Camille had hurt her, how dangerous it would be to let her back in, how she'd only be setting herself up for more pain. But I also knew that pushing too hard against this would seem suspicious, would seem like I had something to hide. I think you should do whatever feels right, I said, the words like ash in my mouth. If you want to hear what she has to say, maybe it's worth a conversation. Natalie agreed to meet Camille, and I began to prepare for the end. The meeting happened at a pub in Shoreditch, neutral territory for a conversation that would either rebuild a friendship or destroy my life. I wasn't there, of course. I wasn't invited, but I spent those hours in agony, imagining what Camille was saying, what questions she was asking, what pieces she was putting together. When Natalie came home that night, I knew from her face that something had shifted. How did it go? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She sat down across from me, studying my face with an expression I couldn't read. Camille thinks you might have manipulated both of us. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? That's insane. Why would I? That's what I said. At first. Natalie's voice was calm, controlled, but there was steel underneath. But then she walked me through everything. The timeline, the conversations, the things you said to her versus the things you said to me, and I started to see a pattern. What pattern? Natalie, this is ridiculous. Camille has always been jealous of our relationship. She's trying to drive a wedge between us. Is she? Or are you the one who drove a wedge between me and her? I opened my mouth to protest, to spin another lie, but the words wouldn't come. Something in Natalie's eyes told me she already knew. Not everything, maybe, but enough. Enough to start questioning every moment of the last 2 years. Enough to see me for the first time as I really was. I don't know what Camille told you, I finally said, but she's wrong. I would never. James doesn't exist. Silence. I went back through my work records, Natalie continued. Every colleague I've worked with in the last 2 years. There's no James. There never was. So where did that name come from, Elise? If you weren't making it up, where did it come from? I could have kept lying. Part of me wanted to. But looking at Natalie's face, seeing the betrayal dawning in her eyes, the love curdling into something darker, I realized that the game was over. The lies that had sustained me for so long were finally collapsing, and no amount of manipulation could rebuild them, so I told her the truth. Not all of it at once. It came out in pieces, in halting confessions interrupted by Natalie's questions and demands for clarification. But I told her about my jealousy of Camille, about the deliberate campaign to destroy their friendship, about the manipulation of David, the fictional affair, the careful lies designed to turn them against each other, about watching their friendship implode and feeling satisfied, feeling victorious, feeling like I'd finally gotten what I deserved. I told her everything, and with each word, I watched her love for me die. When I finally finished, Natalie sat in silence for a long time. The silence was worse than any words she could have spoken. It was the silence of someone processing an unimaginable betrayal, recalibrating their entire understanding of the last 2 years of their life. I need you to leave, she finally said. Natalie, please, now, tonight, pack a bag and go. I can't look at you anymore. I wanted to argue, to beg, to find some combination of words that would make her understand why I'd done what I did. But there were no such words. There was no explanation that would make this okay. I had destroyed her most precious friendship out of jealousy and insecurity, and now I was destroying our relationship by the same truth that had finally set her free. I packed a bag, I left. I walked out of the flat we'd shared, the life we'd built, the future we'd planned together, and I knew with absolute certainty that I would never be welcome there again. The aftermath was worse than I could have imagined. Natalie told people, of course she did. She had every right to. The story spread through our social circles like wildfire, each retelling adding new layers of horror and disbelief. How could anyone be so calculated, so deliberately cruel, so willing to destroy 2 decades of friendship for the sake of their own insecurity? I lost everything. Friends who'd known me for years suddenly couldn't remember why they'd ever liked me. Colleagues who'd respected my work now whispered about my character behind my back. The professional reputation I'd spent years building crumbled overnight as the story made its way through the London PR community. Natalie and Camille, meanwhile, began the long process of rebuilding their friendship. It wasn't easy. There was too much hurt, too many wounds that needed healing. But they were determined to try. United now by a shared understanding of what had really happened and who was really to blame. I watched from the outside as they posted photos together. As their social media filled with evidence of a reconciliation I had never anticipated, I had tried to destroy something eternal, and instead I had made it stronger. My betrayal had become the catalyst for a deeper bond, a friendship forged in fire that would outlast anything I could ever build. The irony was almost poetic. I moved back to Surrey. There was nowhere else to go. My London life was in ruins, and my parents' spare bedroom was the only place that would take me without questions I couldn't answer. I told them work hadn't panned out, that I needed a break, that I was figuring out my next steps. They didn't push for details. For months, I barely functioned. I went through the motions of job searching, of maintaining basic hygiene, of existing in a world that had no place for me anymore. The guilt I'd been suppressing for 2 years now consumed me entirely. I couldn't escape it, couldn't distract myself from it, couldn't find any way to make peace with what I'd done. I started seeing a therapist, not because I thought I deserved help, but because I genuinely didn't know how to survive what I was feeling. Dr. Okonkwo was patient and unflinching, the kind of professional who wouldn't let me off the hook, but also wouldn't let me drown. "You did a terrible thing," she said in one of our early sessions. "But that doesn't mean you're a terrible person beyond redemption. It means you made choices that caused immense harm, and now you need to understand why you made those choices and how you can ensure you never make them again." It was the first time anyone had suggested that redemption might be possible. I wasn't sure I believed her, but I was desperate enough to try. Therapy was brutal. Dr. Okonkwo forced me to examine parts of myself I'd spent my entire life avoiding. The desperate loneliness of my childhood. The conviction that I was fundamentally unlovable. The way I'd learned to manipulate because genuine connection felt impossible. She helped me see that my jealousy of Camille wasn't really about Camille at all. It was about my own self-hatred. My belief that I didn't deserve love and would inevitably lose it to someone better. I destroyed Natalie's friendship as a preemptive strike because waiting for the inevitable loss felt unbearable. Understanding why I'd done what I didn't make it okay. Nothing could make it okay. But it gave me something to work with, a foundation for building a different kind of self. I wrote letters of apology to Natalie, to Camille, to David, to everyone I'd hurt. I didn't send them at first. Dr. Okonkwo said the letters were for me, not for them. The people I'd harmed didn't owe me absolution, and reaching out might cause more pain than healing. But eventually, after almost a year of therapy and growth, I did reach out. A brief email to Natalie, not asking for forgiveness, just offering a genuine apology and acknowledging the full scope of what I'd done. I told her I understood if she never wanted to hear from me again. I told her I hoped she and Camille were happy. I told her I was working on becoming someone who would never make those choices again. She didn't respond. I didn't expect her to. But I hoped that wherever she was, the apology brought some small measure of closure. I moved back to London after 2 years in Surrey. Not to my old life, that was gone forever, but to a new one. I found a job at a small nonprofit, doing communications work for an organization that helped young people in care. The work was humble, poorly paid, miles away from the glamorous PR career I'd once envisioned. But it was honest. And for the first time in my life, I was doing something that actually helped people instead of manipulating them. I made new friends, slowly and carefully. This time, I tried to be genuine, to show people who I really was, instead of performing who I thought they wanted me to be. It was terrifying. The vulnerability felt like walking naked through the world, exposed to rejection at every turn, but some people stayed anyway. Some people actually liked the real me. Once I finally allowed her to exist, I dated again, eventually. A woman named Priya who knew my history, the full, ugly truth of it, and chose to give me a chance anyway. I was honest with her from the start, so honest it felt like bleeding. I told her what I'd done, what I was capable of, why she should probably run. She stayed. People can change, she said. Well, the fact that you're still so clearly devastated by what you did, that tells me something. You're not the same person who made those choices. You've done the work. I'm not sure I believe I've done enough work. I'm not sure I ever will, but I'm trying. Every day, I'm trying. 3 years have passed since that night Natalie told me to leave. I'm 32 now. I have a life that, from the outside, probably looks unremarkable. A modest flat in Brixton, a job that pays the bills, a relationship that brings me more peace than I've ever known. But from the inside, it feels like a miracle. A second chance I did nothing to deserve. I still think about Natalie and Camille. I follow their social media from a distance, not obsessively, just occasionally, enough to know they're both thriving. Camille got married last year, a small ceremony in the Cotswolds that Natalie was part of. Natalie herself is engaged now to a woman who seems kind and steady and nothing like me at all. They're happy, they're whole, they've moved on. I'm the only one still carrying the weight of what happened, and that feels exactly right. This is my confession, the full truth of what I did, finally spoken aloud after 3 years of silence and shame. I lied to my girlfriend and betrayed her best friend forever. I destroyed a 20-year friendship because I was jealous and insecure and so afraid of being abandoned that I became the monster I was running from. I don't expect forgiveness. Not from Natalie, not from Camille, not from anyone who hears the story and recognizes the depth of my cruelty. What I did was unforgivable, and I'll carry that knowledge for the rest of my life. But I hope that by telling the truth, I can at least offer something to the world, a warning. A cautionary tale about what happens when you let fear and insecurity drive your choices. A reminder that manipulation might win battles, but it always loses wars. That the relationships you destroy through lies can never be replaced by the hollow victories you win. I sit in my flat now, watching the London lights through my window, and I think about the person I used to be. The calculating, insecure woman who engineered the destruction of 2 lives because she couldn't bear to feel second best. I don't recognize her anymore. I don't want to. Priya is asleep in the other room. Tomorrow we're having brunch with some friends, actual friends, people who know my history and accept me anyway. In the afternoon, I'm volunteering at a youth center, helping teenagers with their university applications. Small acts of goodness, tiny repayments on a debt I'll never fully settle. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's what I have. I think about what Dr. Okonkwo said to me once, near the end of our work together. Guilt can be a prison, or it can be a teacher. You get to choose which one it becomes. I'm trying to let it be a teacher, trying to learn from the worst thing I ever did, to become someone who would never make those choices again, trying to honor the pain I caused by living a life that's genuinely good instead of just performed goodness. Most days, I think I'm making progress. Some days, the guilt still feels like drowning, but I keep swimming. I keep trying. Because the alternative, giving up, letting the worst version of myself define me forever, would mean that everything that happened was for nothing. And I owe it to Natalie and Camille to make something meaningful from the wreckage I created. They don't know that. They'll probably never know, but I know. And for now, that has to be enough. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're in the early stages of jealousy, of manipulation, of choosing lies over difficult truths, please stop. Please stop before you destroy something precious. Please learn from my mistakes instead of making your own. The person you hurt will recover. They'll move on, build new relationships, find happiness despite what you did. But you will carry it forever. You will wake up in the middle of the night, years from now, and still feel the weight of your choices pressing down on your chest. That's not a punishment. That's just the truth. Choose differently. Choose honesty even when it's terrifying. Choose vulnerability even when it feels like death. Choose to be genuine even if being genuine means sometimes being second best. Because being second best and loved for who you really are is infinitely better than being first place in a life built on lies. I know that now. I wish I'd known it 3 years ago. This is Elise. This is my confession, and I'm still learning to live with what I've done. The night is quiet now. London hums its eternal hum outside my window. Somewhere across the city, Natalie and Camille are living their lives. Finally free from my influence, finally able to be the friends they were always meant to be. I'm grateful for that. Genuinely, completely grateful, and I'm still here. Still breathing, still trying. That's all any of us can do.